Good morning, everybody. Peace and blessings of God be upon everybody. I'm glad that you guys made it here. I'm Dr. Zachariah with Genesis Medical Center and the ShuraTV medical programs. We hope that you're doing well, and glad that you guys can tune in with us. Today is the week that people are going back to school here in Southern California. A lot of the schools are reopening, and people are going back to school, and it's sort of an anxious time for parents sending their kids back after a year and a half of not being in school. And with the news of all the increased number of Delta virus cases or coronavirus, the Delta variant cases, people are a little bit anxious, and a lot of people have a lot of what we can call post-traumatic stress, because the stress of COVID initially, when it came out, is fresh in people's minds, and I think a lot of people are getting in that mode again. And we're getting a lot of calls and questions about whether people should be sending their children in and how they can protect them and all these things. So these things cause a lot of anxiety in society and amongst people, and as well as some people have what we know as PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, where you're exposed to a stressor, some time ago. And then because of new and current events, those stressors kind of creep their way back in, and people have certain manifestations in their being, in their mental health, and in their actually affecting their biological health too, because some of this stuff affects their sleep, and the sleep affects the body and the normal functioning daily. So it's sort of a whole negative effect on general health as well. So we thought we'd discuss a little bit about anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, and how to really, number one, cope with it, and then also to be able to identify it and make sure that we don't suffer from such a thing, or if we are having certain things that are reoccurring, like we have possibly some emotional distresses that are reoccurring and we're not really able to cope with them, then we should have certain regimens or certain things that we can do to alleviate that circumstance. In general, we wanted to discuss a little bit about the differences of what PTSD is and what general anxiety is. Society that we live in, it's a very fast, and there's a hustle and bustle of society. So everybody's trying to get to work. Everybody's trying to take care of their families. Everybody has, economic issues. They have social issues. They have all types of interactional issues with others, and just with coping with life. And then for some communities, of course, they get news. You guys have been watching the news lately, and everything in the U.S., the news is about Afghanistan and the craziness that we see there. And we saw all those poor innocent people running aside the plane, the U.S. military plane, and that image is kind of stuck in everybody's head, and they're playing that over and over again in all the news channels, where you see these poor innocent people trying to get out of the country, and they're running with the plane. And unfortunately, there was 2 to 10 people that passed away there, and a couple of people fell off the plane as it was taking off. So these kind of images, they bring back, for some people that were possible immigrants, their experiences and their struggles when they were leaving their country and trying to make it back to the U.S. So this is something which can cause what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, because it'll cause emotional distress, and then some people actually have physical reactivity to such scenes and such thoughts, or it could be something else that triggers it, but some other familiar situation from long ago that hasn't been resolved, and people currently, when they see something, or they have a memory that reminds them of that experience, then they fall into this PTSD state. PTSD, part of it. So anxiety is part of what people who have post-traumatic stress disorder experience. There's a few components of PTSD that we want to discuss a little bit first, and then we'll get into general anxiety and what the kind of differences are. But with PTSD itself, when people have post-traumatic stress disorder, so there's a trauma that happened, a while back. Something happened in their life that they were not comfortable or it didn't agree with them, whether it's in the form of being taken away from loved ones, like we see with immigrants. They have a lot of separation anxiety. They've been taken away from their families and they've been put into a new environment, and they start new with a new set of rules and regulations and life in general. Typically, it's a new language as well that they have to learn, and it's a new way of life. So they tend to remember that initial trauma of leaving their home countries, these most immigrant communities. So everyone has a story. Everybody has an interesting story to tell you, and within that story, you'll find different types of trauma that a lot of these people have gone through, and now when they live in their host country or their new country, and they go through life, they settle in, they adjust, then things can happen, or they can see things or be reminded of things that can cause that PTSD. And some symptoms and some signs that a lot of these people will have is, number one, they'll have, with PTSD, they'll have nightmares. Nightmares are something that are common, and it'll be related to that traumatic event. So they'll have dreams and nightmares of those people and those events and occurrences that happened in and around that trauma, whether it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 2 years ago. Like, for example, we were talking about, with COVID now, people are going back to school, they're preparing, and parents and children, they might experience a little bit of a trauma, PTSD with events initially with COVID when it first arose and people were sent home. We see now in the news that, there's a lot of people in different districts, in different states being quarantined all of a sudden. And that quarantine might be a triggering effect for them to remember, back a year and a half ago when it first started and people were, under the lockdown and under that quarantine. So a person might overly think about that. They might have dreams and nightmares about that, because really, people haven't had real time to kind of cope with this, the stress and the trauma of COVID. We've been all busy with the hustle and bustle of life and trying to just live through it and normalize things, but there is an effect on our mental state and our health in general as well. So that's something which will come about, and you'll see more and more of it. But you have to learn to see the signs. So nightmares, I said, emotional distress. If you or your child is getting emotionally distressed very often and quite often, and you're not really stable in your emotions, and things are easily getting after these reminders, you get easily stressed and distressed with these emotional outbursts. Maybe in a child, you'll see them. Your child might be sent back home from school and they might be really angry. They might start, yelling or screaming or having some type of emotional disturbance. These are signs of post-traumatic stress, and we'll get to the the treatments and what to do later. Most of these mood alterations are going to be negative. Obviously, people aren't exhibiting happy emotions from a trauma that they remember. Okay, so the emotions and the mood alterations are going to be negative. So, if you see, your child or a parent or an elder getting excessively negative emotions and negative feelings, specifically because, they might be watching the news, and the news also has tons of COVID information, tons of, you see all these issues happening. And if that triggers them and that causes them to think about their personal trauma and how they dealt with these issues, then they get into a negative emotional state. That's something to look into and ask them about. And then also there's a um, sort of a physical reactivity to these types of traumas. And then there's also an exaggerated blame on self and others. Exaggerated blame. So they tend to blame the locus or the reason of this happening, excessively. I mean, it's one thing to have a causal relationship with something and say this caused this, but it's something else if you see someone excessively blaming themselves or others for all these things that are happening around them. That's another thing that PTSD is, something to look for in people who we think might be suffering from a post-traumatic stress disorder. These are basically the things that we look out for. Initially, with PTSD, people have a lot of anxiety, and getting into anxiety, the things to look for are people that are typically they get some sleep disturbances, but not to the extent of regular nightmares about a specific event. They'll have sleep disturbances. They might complain of some type of insomnia, and that's just generalized anxiety. And then the other thing with the physical manifestation of anxiety would be that these folks typically have very, very high muscle tension. So a lot of aches and pains and locking up of muscles. So if you have a lot of anxiety, you could correlate it to a physical symptom of getting high muscle tension. So if you're someone that's always getting, you're getting knots in your neck and your back and all these things that are occurring excessively, then that's something to look for and see what are these things that are possibly causing you anxiety. Things that you might be consciously or subconsciously thinking about, which are causing physical manifestation of high muscle tension in your body. So that's something which is that we don't find a lot with the PTSD diagnosis. Also with anxiety are the folks are very restless. There's a lot of restlessness. They can't sit still. A lot of people will be like, some people like to shake their legs, or they'll do some type of movement that you'll see, and they can't just really be calm and kind of relaxed. And you'll see different movements that people with generalized anxiety have. And it manifests a lot. They said maybe 40 to 50% have some type of leg shaking syndrome, where they're purposely, moving their legs up and down or shaking or something, to the point where a partner, a friend, or a child will tell them, "Oh, please stop shaking. You're shaking your leg too much." And that's something where it's an indication that their anxiety level is high, meaning that this person stresses a lot about everything. And in general, people of faith are positive, optimistic people, and no matter how high or how big the problems that you face, it's very important to always remember that in the end, we put our trust in our Creator, and everything is not under our control, so we can't control everything. If we try to tell ourselves or convince ourselves that everything is under our control, we're definitely going to get anxiety, because we'll realize from day to day that we're not in control of everything, and we cannot be. So this fact itself, not understanding that, causes anxiety, because if you're a person that's sort of a type A personality, and you're always trying to be in control of every situation, that in itself is going to cause a lot of anxiety in your thoughts, restlessness, all that goes with it. And then also the other two things with anxiety are difficulty concentrating. That's something which is telltale in this environment. You see a lot of people, especially kids that don't concentrate. People automatically, rush to the diagnosis of, they have hyperactivity syndrome. But it could just be from anxiety. The kid might be getting stressed, whether by it's the parents or some schoolwork or friends, peers, whatever it is. The first thing to do is see if there are any stressors in your child's life. What are the major stressors, and does your child overthink it and repetitively go into those triggers, and do they think about them always? Because that does cause anxiety, and anxiety consistently in the body or in the mind will cause difficulty in concentration. And so these are very important things to keep in mind, because in children, of course, if you go to the pediatrician and you tell them that, hey, this child can't concentrate and he's running around doing normal child activities, they'll automatically put you in a diagnosis and do testing, and it's sort of a automatic diagnosis of hyperactivity disorder, or they'll have you tested that they want to check if you're on the autistic spectrum, or you have a spectrum disorder. So this is something where they jump to very quickly, and as a parent or as a someone, if you have children in your lives, it's important to kind of decrease the anxiety that they have. Very important, because the anxiety will have physical manifestations, and one of the most important ones is difficulty concentrating. So if a child can't concentrate, that's going to affect their mood, their social behavior skills, their schooling. Cognitive issues will come up that will, as adults, perceive as cognitive issues. But if we kind of remove the layers and see that if there's anxiety in the child, and the child is not concentrating, then we need to do everything possible to minimize anxiety in children so that they perform at their optimal level, mentally and physically. So that's important and something to keep in mind. And nowadays, of course, you see that in adults as well, right? So if we see adults that are hyper anxious, they're anxious about everything, they're getting too much information. I think personally, what happens is that a lot of us get information overload. We all have these with us everywhere we go. So your phone, and then you have your notifications on, which I advise to turn them all off, except your phone, your phone calls and some text that you might get from people on an emergency basis, or your work. That's about it. You don't need all the apps to inform you and notify you of everything that's going on every second, 24/7. It's that itself causes anxiety and causes a lot of irritability in people. Our functioning in our makeup is not such that we receive notices and information every second of every waking hour. It's and some people leave their notifications on when they sleep. They actually keep their phone next to them in bed or under their pillow, which is completely detrimental to normal sleep. So you should not do that. But people do it, unfortunately, and they've developed this symbiotic relationship with their electronic device. So that in itself causes anxiety and causes a disruption in the normal pattern of the biological systems and that affect your mental health as well. So and it's a cause of anxiety because people are receiving all types of news and information and things that normally you need some time to emotionally react to. but they're getting it in real time, multiple times a day, and eventually that'll sort of lead to just a numbness to all info, and also it decreases your attention span. So you'll see a lot of adults, young adults with difficulty in concentration, and you can correlate that directly with their time on their electronic device. If they're on their electronic device, and luckily, they have timers now, and you can actually limit them. But these things cause anxiety in people. It's very important to keep that in mind. And anxiety, again, just to recap: sleep disturbance, insomnia, muscle tension actually causes that physical restlessness, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. That's generalized anxiety. And the triggers for anxiety can be anything. It doesn't have to be something from the past where you're thinking of it and it causes trauma. That would be PTSD. Anything in real time that causes you any type of stress. And how do we define stress? We define stress as anything that increases your cortisol level in the body biologically. So each stressor that hits you during the day or during the night, and you're on the receiving end of that information, you're constantly getting an increase in your hormone, which is known as cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So if you continuously are doing that, which a lot of people now are, because a lot of the news is bad news, right? And 85% plus of the news that we receive, it's all negative news. It's nothing positive. Everything is, doom and gloom. And we hear in real time and see in real time, the suffering of other human beings all over the place. I would suggest that, you check your phone in terms of news and things once or twice a day, and you designate a time for that so that it lowers your level of anxiety, and you're not stressed all the time. It's very important to do that. Otherwise, we see people that can't cope with the normal functioning of life when that happens. Again, so those are the kind of different things between general anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. So if one realizes that, you're in this state, you say, you know what, I have too much anxiety. What do I do? How can I get help? It's very important. It's very important to seek out professional help. Why not? You need it for yourself, just like you would go and get a gym membership for your body to keep your body in shape. You need to discuss this with a professional, whether it's a therapist, a family therapist, a general social worker, your primary care doctor. Tell your primary care doctor, hey, I'm getting too much negative news. It's affecting me. I'm getting irritable. I'm getting some, I'm not functioning normally. So you could get actual cognitive therapy for this, and your insurance will cover it. You ask your doctor, they'll refer you, and you go once or twice a month, discuss these things, and that therapist will teach you coping mechanisms so that you have a optimal life and you're not really buried by all these negative things happening, and you don't become that anxious person. There's ways to cope with it. Of course, there's general things that people recommend, like meditation, prayer, yoga. If you have family and friends, it is a blessing if you can get together with them once or twice a week and just sit down and relax and discuss life, and just have a good time visiting them. Or if you have parents that are available for you to visit, you can visit them and just talk to them. And just talking to them decreases your tension, decreases that anxiety. And the more you get out and get off your chest, same thing with your children. If you talk to them and ask them how they are, how they're doing, then this will decrease their anxiety about things. Children are very innocent. They have a lot of questions. They think about a lot of things. And it's very important for us to be available to them so that they can get that stressor off their mind. And then, of course, if you feel that, these things can't help, that you're doing yourself, then of course get professional help. There's many professionals out there. The field of counseling and psychological care has developed immensely. And there's lots of different types of therapists that you can reach out to and get help. It's very important. There's nothing taboo about it. It's just another function that you have to make use of, because mental health affects your biological health and vice versa. And it's important. And the mind, the body, and your spiritual state and your it all functions together. You're one unit. You can't separate it all. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And what we want to do is prevent general anxiety and also post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's very important. One other thing I didn't mention was with post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of people feel guilt too. Guilt, and they might fall into depression. So it gets serious if you don't take care of it. It's very important, especially for immigrant communities. As I mentioned before, we see in the news, all we see is, the struggle of immigrants trying to get to the US right now in the news. It's a very hot topic. All the countries are talking about how many Afghan refugees will they let in. Canada announced 20,000. The US is looking at their immigration laws. Germany, Europe, Uganda, Brazil, all these countries, the UN, they're having a G7 meeting next week about this. So, these things are hot in the news. You're going to see it over and over again. And if you're an immigrant, it might trigger ideas and feelings from when you were moving out and coming to the country, the host country that you're in now. So these things come up, and it's better to talk about them and get it off your chest rather than bottling it all up in and causing stress for yourself, whether it's physical or mental and social stresses that'll come out. So I encourage you to reach out, talk to one another, have time that you can leisurely relax with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends, people you trust, so that your body and your mind have a time to kind of recoup from the 24/7 output that we get from these devices about news and about all these things that are mostly negative. You have to keep a positive and upbeat life and lifestyle, and keep yourself safe. Yes, there are stressors that are in life, but it's always important to learn techniques and mechanisms to cope with that. And with that, I'd like to bid you farewell, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.